So before we start today, here's a very annoying legal disclaimer. All views expressed are our own and do not indicate the opinions of any employers or clients for whom we work. The recommendations or advice given in this podcast may or may not be right for you based on your circumstances. Please do bear this in mind before taking any action. Welcome to Charting Tracks. My name is Yaqub. I am joined today by my two wonderful co-hosts, Ben Hennessy-Garside and Chris O'Gorman.
Hello.
So Ben is a voice coach. He is a multi-instrumental composer and producer. He was previously an A&R scout at Faith and Hope Records. He is currently a lecturer at Leeds Conservatoire and teaches voice on the popular music course and is a father of two beautiful young boys. Chris O'Gorman is a digital marketing strategist and a digital manager, previously at Sony Music and former head of digital at Capitol Records UK. He runs a digital marketing agency and also develops artists, branding and marketing. My name is Yaqub. I am a record producer. I am a Grammy Award-winning engineer, co-owner of Bison Productions recording studios in East London, and director of Garnish Music Production School in London. So, guys, today the episode is about music creation and composition. And this is somewhere where we have all been, and we obviously continue to be there in some way, shape or form, I guess, as well. Just because we do other things doesn't mean that we don't like to create music, compose music, and it's very much the reason, probably even why we know each other, because we all studied together, and we essentially did a degree in music production, which has creation and composition at the heart of it. So I'm going to kick off today by basically talking a little bit about music creation and composition, kind of as it stands today in today's music industry. And, we have so many tools at our disposal. We have, recording gear, which we can access easily. And it's much cheaper than it was before. We have DAWs, Logic, Reason, Pro Tools, Studio One, everything under the sun. And we are in a very fortunate position in time, I feel, to create and compose. But obviously, even without all of that stuff, we can start at any given instrument. Like we can start on a piano if we just had a piano. We can start on a guitar if we just had a guitar. We can even start with just a voice, because music creation is, there's many components that make up music, a composition, I guess. But creating music itself can be done practically anywhere at any time. All you need is the musicality inside of you. So, Chris, let's start with you. How do you see music creation and composition today?
I guess the thing that's sort of just jumping on from what you said, actually, it's the democratization of music creation. The fact that, you've got artist, director, fan relationships and platforms where you can create your music. Like you say, physical recording equipment is as accessible as it's ever been.
Definitely.
At any point in history. So you're not spending $300 a minute to be in a recording studio. You've got independent studios like yours that are much more accessible to independent artists. You've got home recording software that's much more accessible. And then you've got the means of distribution that are literally available to everyone. Anyone can write something, record something, produce it, and by the end of the same day, if they wanted to, have it released on Spotify, on YouTube, on SoundCloud, on Apple Music, on Deezer, on on all of the various streaming platforms, on Amazon
Yeah.
Music.
Yeah.
And I think what that's done is, I mean, I think it's a good thing. It's created, like I say, it's definitely democratized the process of creating music and allowed for that music content to get heard by, a larger, or to get it heard at all, to be honest. What it's also done, though, is I think led to different genres being created that possibly wouldn't have, had that technology not been available and had that direct to fan distribution not been available. And that's what's kind of, I think, most exciting, is the gatekeepers aren't necessarily deciding what the genres are, the artists are, and then the fans are. And then sort of, coming from where I've come from, which is sort of, record label background, it's interesting how quickly it's, even in the last sort of decade, how quickly it's changed from probably the labels directing a lot of what the next big genre is going to be, the next big thing is going to be, and much more actually jumping on the trend. And it's sort of letting the audience, the music consumer and the artists creating it, influence where that's going, and then sort of jump on that rather than directing it. And I think that's a really exciting thing. It means that it's harder to get heard and harder to get cut through, because you're competing against so many people. I think it was something like 40,000 tracks a day getting uploaded to just Spotify alone, for instance.
It's crazy.
So that shows you obviously how difficult it is to get a cut through. But then you also don't need to necessarily be a mainstream artist. You can also build up your own fan base and have have a direct sort of communication with a fan base on your own.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily require having, being a household name or having global mainstream success to be able to create your music and ultimately get it listened to. So that, I think, is the sort of biggest development in the last decade or so.
Yeah, and just to pick up on a couple of things that you said there quickly, particularly like, how quickly you can get your music out after obviously you've created it. Many DAWs that are working will allow you to publish your song that you've just created from the DAWs straight to SoundCloud.
Yeah.
Like literally, you don't even have to go onto SoundCloud to upload it. It's crazy. But also something that really sticks out to me when you talk about direct to fan and when we're talking about creation, obviously over the period of lockdown and quarantining and all of that kind of stuff due to COVID, we've seen people who are artists on many different levels reaching out to their fans, and in some cases, even creating stuff in front of their fans live. So I know there's a fairly famous hip hop producer called Kenny Beats, and he did a series of streams on Twitch where he was creating things live in front of people who were watching him on Twitch, which is like kind of just goes to show how far we've come. Can you ever imagine that in 1965? It just wouldn't be. It wouldn't really be happening at all, would it?
You'd see it maybe in a room,
Yeah.
but nobody beyond that room.
Yeah, exactly.
That audience in that physical space would be able to see it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Ben, your thoughts on music creation and composition today?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the democratization thing, being able to speak directly with and to fans, yeah, I mean that's going to change things. That thing about the industry elites not being able to control things, this is all good. Same again with what you just mentioned there. That means it's harder to quote unquote cut through. This thing about producers. Like making beats live and kind of allowing their fans into kind of, I suppose, behind the curtain into the creative process. There is something about the relationship, and we touched briefly last time on we talked about authenticity, didn't we? And something else about the democratization is that gap between the fan and the artist is shrinking, and so the question for creators then is, well, what do we do about that? Now, there have been quite a few people kind of toying with this space. There was one band I came across a few years ago now, actually, who would they would invite their fans into studio sessions and, you know, hand out percussion instruments, and their fans would actually end up on the record. Yeah. So things like that, something about handmade and bespoke experiences, really focusing on those people that get you and what you do. Yeah, there's something about building your niche. So there's something slightly different about that, you know. So yeah, a few themes: co-creation with your fans, finding your niche, not necessarily being so stressed out about appealing to a massive market, but finding your crew, your tribe, the people that really get what you do, and then including them in the process.
Yeah, definitely.
Community building as much as anything else. And so, like last time, if you turn up and you just make your music and you don't really want to think about your artistic persona at all or your brand, there's a similar kind of thing here, right? Which is if you just want to make your music and expect it to just stand by itself with no interaction or feedback from your audience, I mean, I don't know. You might find a way of making that work, but it doesn't seem to be the way things are going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, obviously, this kind of brings up creating something in private versus creating something publicly. And obviously, everything, I guess, was created fairly privately before the advent of the internet, particularly something like social media. And we now have, obviously, the ability to create in a very public manner, which is a very interesting place to start, really, because particularly when I was thinking about today's episode, it's about what creation, not method or methods you prefer, but it depends on how you want to work. Because, like, even if we take, you know, Ben's example of the band who brought in their fans, and we kind of start to reduce that down to a smaller circle, we would probably want to think about something like collaboration as well, as a way of creating. So, you know, music, I always say this, music creation can tend to be a solo sport. It can be a one-player game, right? So it would just be you perhaps and your instrument or at your computer if you're making, you know, computer-based music, if you want to call it that. There's something about collaboration in creation which I find very interesting. And I guess this is really where I wanted to kick off talking about stuff, because we're going to go on to talk about stuff like, you know, what are the things we have to consider when we're creating and composing. But firstly, it's about your environment and you know, opening it up and thinking about collaboration. I collaborate a lot. So I'm constantly working with lots of different people, and I find that I probably work best with other people. And I just wanted to know what, from a personal experience, what works for you, Ben, and what works for you, Chris. So let's start with Ben. What works for you? How do you feel about collaboration?
I think it's great when it works. I don't know, that might be kind of a trite thing to say, but one thing is that there's a whole skill set that runs alongside collaborating effectively, and sometimes people don't acknowledge that. There are ways of being which will mean that the music gets made more smoothly, more efficiently. And sometimes it's to do with personalities. I personally don't get on in kind of competitive environments. That's just a personal thing. So I like, if there's somebody that wants to come and have a fight with me over the music, like, the thing is that really suits some creators. Like, some people need to have a fight, and in the fire of the fight, some good stuff will happen. For me, that doesn't work. And so, like last week, we were talking about knowing ourselves. It's kind of, if that's the kind of collaborative relationship you want to have with me, it's not going to work. It's like, I wish you well. Go and make some wicked music with someone that's going to the vibe with that, and it's going to work. But for me, there needs to be kind of a sense of love and a sense of respect in the room. I really like playfulness and curiosity. Like we talked about this last time.
Yeah, of course.
So if someone has an idea, a willingness to try it rather than shut the thing down before it's even been toyed with, I find that kind of that openness at the beginning, because this is the other thing too, right? Is that in the process of creation, you can't just be constantly open. Oh, we could try that. Oh, we could try this. Oh, we could try that. Oh, we could try this. Oh, we could try that. Oh, like there's a place for that. Like there's a time, like at the beginning, when perhaps, if you're lucky enough to not be operating with any constraints at all, which is rare, you know, even if it's you or the other person has just come into the session with some preconceived ideas about how things are going to go, those preconceived ideas form a kind of boundary around the creative space that you can then play in. But then, I mean, obviously, other people have stuff like label pressures. They have,
of course,
you know, there's what instruments you have access to in that moment. There's a whole heap of other boundaries. Boundaries, I think, on the whole, are good as long as they're not too rigid and not too tight at the beginning of the process. And so then there's at some point you're going to want to tip into like not a creative place and more of an editing place. And again, this is like knowing yourself. Are you really good at moving rapidly backwards and forwards from those two places? Because some people can do that.
Yeah,
they can open up, they can close, they can open, they can close, they can open, they can close, and they can leap back and forwards rapidly. And if you're that kind of person, and you want any collaborators that you're working with to be that kind of person, you need to find those people and play in that way with each other. Other people need like almost a time period. It's like, right, I'm going to give myself 2 hours. Like we talked about last time, 2 hours. All ideas are valid. Everything's fine. We'll just open the floodgates. Whatever comes. And then after 2 hours, we're going to then refine. So we'll pick the ideas that are working the best, and then we'll run with those, you know? Yeah.
So that's how it kind of works for you as well. Like, I suppose two things I'm going to pick up on one thing only at this point, from what you said.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite albums of all time is D'Angelo's Voodoo album, and that album was created through a series of jams. So
Yeah, nice.
what it was they sat in the control room of the studio. I believe it was Electric Lady in New York, and they sat in the control room and they listened to James Brown and Sly and the Family Stone records, and then him and his band went into the live room and they would literally jam for like 2 hours. And just through the jams, they would come back in and they would have a listen to what happened, and they go, that point, that's a jumping off point for a new song. And I suppose a lot of what you're saying is kind of, particularly when the letting yourself be free, having some sort of constraints and limits, I guess, which is something we'll talk more about in a second. But also knowing that anything goes. As long as everyone's on the same page, particularly with that, and it's kind of like everyone wants to just go in and have a jam and see if they can come up with something new, great songs. I suppose that's great. But one thing you did mention was where people might not be on the same page about something. So, we might have a drummer that comes in and starts playing drums, and half an hour to the jam, he's going, it's like, what's going on, guys? This is boring. I'm just bored out of my brains right now. And then you have a problem in the context of collaboration, as it were. Okay, so Chris, what are your thoughts? Like, do you like to create public? Not publicly, sorry. Do you like to create in collaboration? Do you like to create by yourself? What works?
So from a musical musical creation perspective. Like I'm having to go back to my singer-songwriter days, which are many, many moons ago.
They were great days, Chris, all right?
I think it was just after the American Civil War. That's how far back we now. No, but when I used to do that, when I used to be kind of doing the sort of singer-songwriter thing, I think it was 100% by myself. That's how I like to write. Just it's very personal, and it's and also the genre that I was in is kind of folksy singer-songwriter, and it just sort of lends itself to that. For the most part, I think probably lends itself to that solo process, though not for everyone. There's I think like the Civil Wars. That's just jumped into mind now that I said the Civil War. The band, the Civil Wars,
Yep.
were absolutely one of the best writing teams together, and quite a troubled partnership. But actually, I think some of the greatest work they did was sort of collaborative. So that genre can have that. But for me, it was just I liked to write. It was a very personal kind of thing, and it was just like it was quite confessional. So it was just alone. That's how, with a piano or guitar, that's how it was. But then when it came to the recording and sort of arrangement and production phases, that's when I'd be more than happy to bring it over and be like, okay, I broadly hear this, and these are some of the tracks that I'm thinking as reference recordings, and then be like, but when you got a guitarist or a drummer or a bassist, I'm like, that is all you do, you go ahead. I'm not going to write for you. I'm not going to pre-prescribe what you should be doing. That is why I'm bringing you on for your expertise and for your creative input. And so for me, the collaborative phase used to come at the kind of recording and probably, I guess, like the production and recording phase. And that's what really worked for me. But then, so that's from a musical standpoint. But then interestingly, something that Ben said just got me thinking about like actually how I approach sort of collaboration from a marketing standpoint, like for when I'm marketing an artist and we're coming up for ideas. And actually, I think what you said about sort of having a like ring fencing the process so that it's like you've got a bit to be super creative and all that, and actually that's what we do when I'm starting with a new artist, when we're working on a campaign. I'm kind of start off in a similar way, solo, to set the broad bones of the strategy, and then you collaborate with the rest of the team, with A&R, with the artist, with management, and you refine, get that solidified. And then again, especially when you're coming into actually putting campaign ideas together, the thing that we would always do very early on at the process, once the broad bones of the marketing strategy are put together, is your sort of more creative ideas, your more creative sort of idea sessions. And that's when you'd have a session that is all the team members all together, and it's, you lock yourself in a room, and there is no bad idea with just everything, and it's just space for all and that's where the best ideas tend to come from. And then like I've said before, even if you have to have 9 ridiculous ideas that are never going to happen to get that one really great one, that's what that space is for. So that's when the collaborative element happens, and then you take it away again as somebody that's been leading these campaigns. You can take those ideas and then you go back to being a bit solo and kind of structure that into your campaign, into your actual strategy. And then again, you become collaborative when you start bringing. Then I'm going to bring a graphic designer in to make that aspect. I'm going to bring in a animator to create that bit of content. So it's interesting, actually, the two parallels with music creation and with idea sort of creation of marketing campaigns and content for artists actually run quite parallel for me. It starts as a solo thing, then goes collaborative, then maybe goes solo again, and then becomes collaborative. And that is sort of the process that goes right through the that's kind of the whole I guess the cyclical process.
Yeah. And I'm sure that Ben would agree that there's an element of that in the work that he does as well. Interactions with people, and constantly kind of like collaborating, and then coming back into himself, and then collaborating. Same with me, really. I really do like to start ideas by myself, but I obviously, part of my job is to just collaborate with people. Like 90% is collaboration. Interestingly, one of the things you said in there, Chris, and and again, it's something that Ben kind of was talking about. Is what I call gold digging. So you're going to dig for gold, and obviously there's so much muck you have to kind of just get through, and you find this stone and it's not gold, and you're like, that shit, I'll throw it away. And then you go on, you dig, you find your gold, right? This is like how it works with ideas, and music creation and composition are ideas. At their core, they're ideas. And so the no bad ideas kind of thing, I think that's something that definitely, one of the things that listeners should take away when they're thinking about music creation and composition. We have to go through a lot of bad ideas to get to good ones. And, if anyone tells you otherwise, they're lying. And what tends to happen is we have this perception of every idea is a great idea because obviously your artist that you're listening to, let's say, I don't know, you're a bigger fan of, let's pick a name out of the air, Adele. Okay, you're a big fan of Adele, and all of her songs off her album to you are great. And obviously you're there like, man, she's got nothing but great songs. But in reality, how many bad songs would she have gone through to get to those really, really, really great songs that you love? Probably quite a few. And, I guess this is just a thing in general. We, as artists, we are allowed to present the best versions of ourselves because we are there. We're working through our ideas, all the good ones, bad ones, and we're curating what we think are the best ideas, and we're putting them together and we're putting them forward, and it's kind of like a highlight reel of your last year of music creation. Nobody's going to hear your bad ideas because you lock them away and forget about them, or you throw your hard drive off a bridge or do something dramatic. So the gold digging thing, it really is something that I wanted to kind of like put in there for you guys, and I didn't try and get this out of either of you guys. You just said it yourself, so thank you very much. But for all of our listeners, I think creation, before we really start to delve into it, we should be thinking, actually, let's just be a little bit easier on ourselves. I was listening to a documentary about the creation of Thriller the other day, and they went through hundreds of songs to get the 10 that were on the album. And, to me, they're 10 amazing songs. But there's a lot of twists and turns along the way, actually. In this documentary that I was listening to, I did hear some of the demos, and I was like, well, if this was ever released, it would sound like a musical theatre album. So it's very interesting, obviously, on that side of things. But also, one more point to make is there is no right or wrong way when it comes to working. You can work by yourself, you can collaborate with people, you can do a mix of the two. There's no real right or wrong way. People have preferences, but it's a good idea to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. If your comfort zone is always working with other people, then maybe draw back into yourself. Or if your comfort zone is working with yourself alone, then always push yourself to draw from other people as well, Okay, so I'm going to pick up on the thing that I think is a common theme here, things that we've discussed. When it comes to constraints, limits, boundaries, all of these kind of things, the big thing that sticks out to me is focus. So we can obviously go on creating forever and ever, amen, if we want to. But we have to probably implement some sort of focus. So Chris has an idea session, and his idea session is really, it's geared towards something, isn't it? It's geared towards, we've got to get a marketing campaign together for 5 Seconds of Summer, right? And we kind of like, I think we talk about all of the things that we have available to us, all of the tools that we talked about in the beginning of the episode. How do we focus? How can we focus our creations and our compositions maybe by having constraints and limits and boundaries and all of that kind of stuff? How can we begin to focus that so that we are in a way, optimizing ourselves to bring the best creations out of ourselves. Let's start with Chris. What do you reckon?
Well, from the sort of more business side of the industry, from the label world, yes, you obviously have an A&R phase where you want to give the artist their time to be creative, and you can't rush that process, and it has to be they have to have the space to be inspired, etc. Especially if they're a writer, if they're an artist that mostly kind of collaborates with other writers. A lot of the times you kind of do your writing workshops where you have them hang out with a few different writers during the day, and they kind of go from room to room. And I know that you've done lots of those.
Plenty of those.
Yeah, and it's almost like a bit more of the sort of the old school Motown factory of a bit of a songwriting production line, I suppose. But I guess coming from the sort of industry side, you're of course aware that you need to have that time to be creative and inspired. But especially if it's a major label, and even if it's an independent label, there is going to be a hard release date, because when they're looking across their artist roster and across the release schedule, they're going to need something in Q1, they're going to need something in Q2, they're going to need something in Q3, and they're definitely going to need a lot of stuff in Q4 going into the Christmas release, because those are the big gifting opportunities when people are going to buy music. Traditionally,
yeah, of course.
Obviously, with streaming, a lot of that's kind of shifted, but it's still, they're going to need a set amount of releases throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to put our kind of flagpole in the ground somewhere.
Of course.
So, we would be looking at kind of, okay, what are our competitor acts doing? So if it was like using 5 Seconds to Summer as an example, it'd be, okay, when are One Direction releasing? Is there any, when is the Vamps releasing, or whatever the other competitor acts are, or with Sam, it's when is Adele releasing is the big one. Is Emily Sandé releasing? Is Ed Sheeran? That's the other big one, because you're not going to go head to head, because you're competing for the same audience or a very similar overlap audience. So you don't want to cannibalize. So generally you'll kind of be right, well, this is when they're releasing, that's where they're releasing, this is going to be the best time for us. There's the gap. We find the gap, and that, more often than not, that release date is really going to be, that's a hard release date now. Sometimes you'll have to push back or forward, but really, and considering with like a major artist as well, you're dealing with international markets where they have to coordinate everything in the individual labels on the ground in each market. So the whole process is basically now, okay, I've got this hard release date, and come hell or high water, something's going to get released. So I think that is the sort of constraint, I suppose, in that hopefully you have, like, I don't know, 6 months, maybe longer, to be creative and to be able to get the actual music product created.
Yeah.
But then you'll have a delivery date where, that music product, it needs to be delivered in its final form, and and it always comes down to the wire.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it moves, but I think having that hard release date is the thing that finally sort of pushes the creative process to be all free form at the start, like it should be, and not forcing yourself, not editing yourself, but you kind of, once you're then getting towards the end of that, and you're kind of you're now like sort of, so you'll have your sort of hard release date, but before that you'll have your hard delivery date, and the delivery date is when that music, the final music content, product, whatever you want to call it, masterpiece, artwork, the final recordings need to be delivered. So if you're getting like a month out from your hard delivery date, that's when having that delivery date in mind is going to start focusing the ideas. And it's like, right now we've got all these different ideas that we're going to have to start going with the ones that we feel strongest about. And that having that structure does, in most cases, help, I think, the creative process, because rather than it being a hindrance, it actually focuses the creative process.
Yeah.
And as you get closer and closer to it, it starts consolidating everything, I think, and then that's when you kind of get to your final phases of the production process. So from my perspective, it definitely is. I'm sure the artists will be like, "You're good," and some artists can do is they can say, "You'll have the album when it's ready."
Yeah, well,
when you're a big enough name,
yeah,
to
exactly.
an extent, you can do that, and you can say, you know, as a label, you might say, "Okay, as long as it's in Q4 at the end of the year, it might be next Q4." But normally they'll be like, "Well, we need to, you know." Every record label has investors and has directors and has shareholders, and if they aren't going to get a big release in each quarter, that's going to be a problem. So, you know, there's so many different variables. But generally speaking, having that hard release date as a focal point, in most cases, does help the creative process rather than harm it.
Yeah. And I mean, like, just to pick up on what you said, like, you're basically talking about one of the things that I wanted to push forward today, which was to have a deadline, which is, and I mean, a big constraint for everyone is time. There's obviously, the clock is always ticking. And, you know, it's funny, we're talking about this perhaps in even just a major label sense or record label sense. But if you are an independent artist, you're still going to have a deadline, because there's a process that happens after the music is created, which relies on you creating it by a certain time. But also your fans are waiting. You know, I remember one of the first times, I suppose, this is an artist who can do this. When you say you'll have the album when it's ready, Chris, Stevie Wonder said that when he was making Songs in the Key of Life, which is obviously double disc album, and the runtime is like really long. And you know, he can get away with it because he's Stevie Wonder, and he was like 5 or 6 albums into his career, and there was actually a lot of anticipation around it. Today, though, there's very few artists who could say that, and also, I think there's more of a demand as well as nowadays. There's more of you've got to be releasing stuff to stay relevant and so on and so forth. And so there's that aspect. Depends on how much you care about it or not, of course. But there are people who say you can't rush perfection, but you've got to get it done right. Time is a constraint. It's a limit. Ben, what are your thoughts on this?
So yeah, I mean, time. There's like the kind of macro time things you're talking about in terms of the release of a given product. You know, whatever that's going to be and when that needs to come out. But then there's also, you can use it too. So in the example you gave, Amir, where you were talking about the whole band would sit down and listen to, what was it, James Brown?
And Sly and the Family Stone,
that kind of funk stuff. So that's a kind of constraint as well, but it's a loose one. I mean, in the sense that they're hearing a certain sound before going in to the jam session. Now, and the other thing as well is, fine, if you want to jam, fine, but put some constraints around it. So, like you said, in the example you gave, you said like they'd jam for a couple of hours, they'd record the whole thing. There would then be this process at the back end where they would review. Remember from a couple of times ago? Plan, do, review, right? They would then use those recordings, and then they would review, and then they would, like you say, curate and select, there's a real clear distinction then between the creative process and the constraining process. And this is one thing that I've had experience of over pretty much my entire time as a music educator, working with young musicians working in bands. And there's this thing that happens, which is they get into a practice room together. Maybe they've been put in groups or whatever, and then it's like, oh, what should we do? Well, let's just have a jam. Okay, right, fine. But why? And this is the thing, is like, yes, that openness to just seeing what appears and comes up in the moment is brilliant. And you also need to put some of these constraints around it, because these jam sessions could just go on. You can take your entire rehearsal time just jamming, leave, make no effort to record it, no effort to review it. If you want to do it as a little bit of a warm-up just to get into the groove, fine, you've got a reason for it. Right, that's 20 minutes, and then it's down to whatever else you've planned for in that rehearsal session. But, yeah, being really aware of the difference between creation and editing, or playing as in, and I don't just mean playing instruments, I mean playing as in like
playing around,
having fun, messing around like you would as a child, toying with stuff, exploring, and then constraint, and knowing what the edges are, what the boundaries are around the play park, or for another metaphor. So yeah, that thing about finding gold, you can't just dig.
Yeah.
Like just digging and digging and digging, and with I don't know, like with with some kind of mask on covering your eyes so you can't even see where the gold is. Like, take the mask off and allow for a bit of discernment.
Yeah.
So yeah, time is a great way. Right, we've got 2 hours to jam. That's it. That's what we're doing. We're recording it. After 2 hours, whatever we've got. There's no going back in that room. We're gonna unpick. We're gonna spend the rest of the day looking at what the best ideas are from that session, and that's then gonna form the bedrock or the foundation for a song.
Yeah.
Other forms of constraints. Style.
Yeah.
Genre, specific artists. Like, what was the name of the artist that was listening to the Sly and the Family Stone and James Brown? D'Angelo, sorry. Him and his team were obviously managing that by insisting that the band sit down and listen to a whole heap of stuff before they go in. Just to kind of let the overall sound of the style kind of seep in.
Right.
We've talked already a bit about instruments being a form of constraint, like a sonic constraint and a physical, practical constraint, depending on your abilities to play that instrument. If you're not used to playing a given instrument and then you try and write on that, then you're artificially creating a kind of constraint, which is there's like a form of narrowing.
That's right.
There's also the stuff we talked about last time, which is the core values and branding and the archetypal wheel stuff as well. Bound up in all that stuff are a set of sensibilities.
Yeah.
Right? If you're a rebel, there are a bunch of auditory expectations that the listener's going to have in order. So that's going to impact what you do. If you're a rebel, you might want to, what's coming to mind for me as an example, say, is some kind of distortion effect, say.
Yep. Yeah.
Is something you might associate with something rebellious. There's something about
more ragey.
Right. There's some kind of rage there, some anger, some pushback coming from that.
Right.
Which, of course, as a vocal specialist, that's when people shout. There's often a natural distortion that comes from that when someone shouts in anger. So a lot of this stuff is built into our physiology. So you might mimic that on a say a guitar or something to kind of create a little bit of rebelliousness. I mean, that's the other thing, is you can use themes or concepts. They can also act as a type of constraint on the music that you're making.
Absolutely, and I think that one thing I'm getting from what you're saying is, a lot of the time you've got to ask yourself why you might be doing a certain thing. For instance, in the case of jamming, why are you jamming? Are you just jamming because you want to get into the groove? Or is it because you're gold mining for some nuggets that you can take away and bring onto your record as either something that you're going to use as a jumping off point for a song, or something that you're going to sample, or whatever, however you want to use it. But also, how does that fit into who you are? And I suppose when it comes to constraints and thinking about constraints, I suppose time is the obvious constraint, but the less obvious one would be, are you going to confuse your listener by not having things that kind of necessarily fit into who you are? And that takes us back to thinking about knowing yourself and authenticity. So I suppose the point of having this conversation and not actually talking about music creation and composition and what comprises that is because there's a lot of preliminary things that you have to think about as an artist and as an individual. You're going to want to constantly want to working on and refining the way you approach music creation and your composition, but not from the point of the composition itself, perhaps even more so from the point of how you approach coming to that specific thing. Go on, Ben.
Yeah, so I was just going to say there's a couple of things I wanted to say. So the reason why constraint is worthy of our consideration as creatives is because we can just disappear down rabbit holes. Like, because if you're a creative person, like you just love that, having the idea, you love the exploration, you love which is why it needs to be perhaps more of a pre-planned kind of a cognitive thought process. Right, I am putting these boundaries around, and I'm going to prep before I just dive into the creative pool, so to speak. I'm going to prep how long I'm going to be staying there for, and I'm going to prep what the reasons are. Now, the other thing I want to say about that though is thinking about things up front can also be a form of trap, and so a lot of this is about balance.
Yeah,
like I mentioned when we were talking about planning, reviewing, and doing, you can spend too long planning sometimes too, so nothing creative actually happens. You decide up front you're going to sound like this artist, and that's your plan, and that's what you're going to do, and then there's a whole heap of reality that never gets discovered or never gets explored because you're tied to this thing. So there's kind of risks and rewards in both directions, and the key is about balance. So maybe you don't need to think about it in advance. If whatever's working for you is working for you, run with that.
Yeah,
because we can get tied up in analysis paralysis too. So I just wanted to caveat that thing. So, but that question of why am I doing this? Yeah, that's key, and that's a big question producers ask, right? Like, why is that there?
Yeah, exactly.
And if you can't answer it, then
should it be there? Yeah.
Well, there's a chance it's there for like ego, or just because it was there before. Yeah, that question is good, as long as you don't just constantly ask questions, because that's the other thing too. We can get all really heady about it, and lose our embodiment and lose our lose the playfulness. So it's a balancing act.
Because it's interesting you say that as well, because I know there's times when you get a big name producer and a big name artist, you think, oh, this is going to be great.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work often is because the producer has a name for themselves. And they're kind of doing something there that's, well, this is what's, I'm putting something in here to really showcase my production. And it might be that at the detriment of the artist and vice versa. And for some reason that partnership actually doesn't work because there's a competing sort of agenda there. And then you get partnerships where it completely fits, and it's because I guess maybe ego stripped out a little bit, and the artist is going in just trying to do the best for the song. The producer's trying to go in just trying to do the best for the song and that's when it just slots in nicely.
Definitely. And I mean, coming back again to collaboration, you've got to make sure the people you're collaborating with are on the same page as you. And I suppose it all reminds me of that Quincy Jones quote where he says, we leave our egos at the door and we leave space for God to walk into the room. Essentially what happens is, if you're a sports team and you're comprised of amazing individuals like to all of my listeners, to all of our listeners out in Holland, you had teams comprised of hugely talented individuals, but couldn't always perform like you would have thought they would have on the world stage. Perhaps there was a bit too much of, I always kick the ball to this person or pass the ball to me or whatever. Some people also don't know how to work well in team collaboration as well. Some people are used to being superior to other people, and so therefore when they find someone maybe that's their match in terms of skill or creativity or just general badassery, it's kind of like I can't quite perform like I used to, and there's so many dynamics to all of that kind of stuff. I suppose one of the things that I wanted to say was, one thing that I love about the process of creation, if we think about it from the beginning to the end of a record, and a lot of that obviously I oversee in many of my roles. When we start out a record, obviously with any given artist, what we'll be doing is we'll be throwing a lot of ideas down, going, this will be a good idea for a verse, put that as a hook. That sounds more like a pre-chorus than it does a chorus, and blah, 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 blah. And that's me obviously being a writer, and adding sounds and getting performances is me being a producer. But obviously when I go in to sit down and mix a record, I'm thinking with the editing mind, with the mind of actually that sound is serving no purpose whatsoever. Let's just remove it and see if it sounds better. And usually they say perfection is not when there's nothing left to add, but actually when there's nothing left to take away. That's something that I've kind of worked with, I suppose, all my life, or all my career at the very least, ever since I heard that quote, because of the simple fact that I feel like you are going to be constantly taking stuff away, and it's okay to have loads of ideas in the beginning, but everything needs its own space. When I think about it musically, and I think about it as a mixing engineer, everything needs its own space. Otherwise, what is the function of any given thing?
It's funny, there's a fashion analogy to that. Not that I know anything about fashion at all. But like, I think it's a really famous one. It's like that Coco Chanel said, where she's like, before you leave the house, when you got dressed and you look in the mirror and take the last thing off that you put on. And it's like a rule of thumb, not an absolute, but just like it's a little bit like that, isn't it? It's like, do I need that? Maybe.
Oh yeah, most definitely, yeah.
I mean, my natural home creatively is as a minimalist like that.
Yeah,
like I'd sooner have a solo voice. Like,
yeah.
if it works, like really, if it works well with just a singer just singing with nothing else, then why throw loads of stuff all over it? If nothing's being added. But then there are some people that the other way, aren't there? There are some producers and artists that just love throwing loads of stuff at it, and if that's your vibe,
yeah. But that's the thing, and it's I guess it's whatever works for the piece or for the song or for the composition. And it's
I like that. Yeah, that's a really. And I just wanted to just double down on what you'd said with that there, Chris, just before, and I hadn't done so. I just want to do that now as a nice little kind of psychological constraint of like, is this serving the song? Like taking a step back and being like, this isn't about me. It's not about the other person that's in the room.
Yeah.
It's not about the producer. It's not even about the label. It isn't necessarily even about one individual, or a group of fans. It's what's serving the song, and being able to do that might help you just step back from, because we often in creative places we can get really quite attached to ideas.
Yeah,
and there's something about being willing and able to kill your sacred cow.
Yeah.
In the moment, and that's a way of allowing yourself to do that.
Yeah.
Of creating a bit of difference. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, for sure, absolutely. And I think you got lots of real world analogies of that. I know. I think I spoke in one of the previous episodes about like the famous David Foster, Whitney Houston production, "I Will Always Love You," and the production process for that, and that. At first he didn't want the bit where it's a cappella at the start. I think Clive Davis wanted it
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think Kevin Costner that was in the film wanted it. And he didn't. And then at the end, he was like, okay, no, it works. It actually does work like that. And it's, they went through a lot to get there, but that's part of the collaborative process. And there was another one like that with, I think it was Linda Perry, who was writing and producing the Christina Aguilera song.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, yeah. And it was, the song, it was what's best for the song. And that's the thing. And the song, they recorded the demo, Perry and Aguilera wrote it together, and they recorded the demo for it. And because Christina wanted to go back and redo the vocal and Linda Perry was like, this isn't about you. It's not about your ego. It's not about you sounding perfect. Christina's like, I want it to be perfect. And she's like, this song isn't about being perfect. The whole point of the song is that you're beautiful with your flaws and stuff. And it's like,
exactly.
And that was what cut through. And she's like, yeah, right. And that the version that got released was the original demo vocal take.
Yeah.
And it's exactly like you say, because it's what was best for the song.
Exactly. And you know what's so funny as well? I always say that in sessions as well. What works best for the song? Maybe we were in a lesson together where we heard that Chris.
Yeah, I think probably, yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
But yeah. That is actually a phrase that I use a lot of the time. I'm just like, if you're going to create art and you want it to have the right impact, but also the right meaning, you have to be able to serve the song. It's literally not about you want to do this and that person wants that person wants that part to be in there and all that kind of stuff. One thing I will say, just based on something you've both been saying as well, and Ben mentioned, if it calls for just having a solo voice, I'm for that. Clive Davis in the Whitney Houston example and Linda Perry in the Christina Aguilera example. Actually, throwing everything in the kitchen sink at a song in creation is maybe not a bad idea in the beginning, but you've got to remember and have more often than not what this comes down to is confidence, right? Mm-mm. So this is something I've learned over time. Less confident people are more likely to throw everything in one song because they're like, look at what I can do.
Got to try and prove myself. Yeah,
exactly right. But if you have the confidence to not do that, and if you have the restraint, we've talked about constraints, but restraint to go, I believe that this element and this element and this element, just pick three, could actually stand alone in this song, right? Then you are building the confidence to, in your artistry, in your composition, in your creation process, you're building the confidence to cut through a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because overproduced stuff tends to sound confusing.
Yeah.
It tends to confuse the listener because actually many studies have been done about the way that people listen to music and they can only concentrate on three elements at any one time. So, so all of those extra 5 guitar parts that you've got noodling away in the background, no one's listening to those. They're listening to the drums, the bass and the vocal. Yeah. Because those are the things that are the loudest and they're the ones that stick out. And I think it's got a lot to do with confidence. And I suppose as a listener, you should try and build your confidence by actually doing something which is a lot more stripped back.
Yeah.
So actually taking away as much as you can, to the point where you take something away and you go, I really missed that. That's when you know it should be. Then you know it should be.
If you miss it and it's not there, that's when you're like, oh no, it does need to be there. Yeah.
Exactly.
And if you don't feel that, then
right.
So I think that's what comes with experience, isn't it? That's
exactly. It does. That's why it's taken me time to learn it.
Yeah.
Because at the beginning I was probably like, we'll have that sound going there. That sound goes off like that, and you get all crazy about it because you're not really that confident. But as you mature, as you get more experience, Ben, I'm sure you'll hear singers who can over-sing stuff early in their career.
Oh, yeah. It's a typical problem. You get these technically great singers. The fantastic singers, they can do riffs, runs, licks. They can sing in multiple sounds in all different parts of their range. Like, great great performers, but they think that like every note or every beat of every bar needs to be filled with everything simultaneously, you know. And it's just like, no, just sing the song, right?
Yeah, the
give us at
melody,
least one
right,
verse and one chorus of just the song. Just give us that, right?
Yeah.
Then those of us mere mortals that can't do what you're doing can at least sing along for the rest of the song, because we've got an idea about what it sounds like without all the bells and whistles on.
Yeah.
Right. Then you go and do your bells and whistles, and we'll all be here in the crowd singing along like the original verse melody and the original chorus melody, and we can engage and join in with you.
Absolutely.
But if you come in and you're giving us everything all the way through, well, what happens is the first verse feels great, and you know, maybe the first chorus feels great, but honestly by the end of the song, people are just bored. Because it's like the initial like excitement of, oh wow, they can do that thing, the initial excitement of that just wears off. You just get used to it, which is crazy, because you know, chances are they've spent you know thousands of hours working on their instrument. Maybe they're, you know, lucky enough to be born with a heap of natural talent as well. And it's like, you're just going to give it all to me in one go.
Yeah.
Like, and then I'm done after.
Save something.
A minute.
Exactly.
Like,
Save something for the big finish, or you build up to it.
Absolutely.
And again, that's experience, isn't it?
Yeah. And motion is vital. Like,
Well, yeah. I mean, this like it comes to you know what we were talking about when we were talking about knowing yourself and having a story. A composition should have a story.
Right.
It can have a beginning, a middle, and end. It shouldn't be like I'm driving. When you drive a car, you know, you go from first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Not I'm going to be in fifth gear for this whole journey. You know.
Right.
Yeah.
Ben, sorry, I cut you off there, mate.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, like, motion is vital. Like, we human beings, we're a weird animal. We're a weird animal because we don't like being bored, so we don't like things staying the same. Yeah. We also can get overfaced by too much change all at once, right? And so what you get with these, for example, these singers that just throw everything right from the beginning, and then that just sits there at like this level of intensity right the way through, is you get the worst of both worlds. Because what you get is, well, there's so much going on, I can't deal with it, I can't cope. Like, so there's from the very beginning, there's an overstimulation on the part of the listener. But then because the listener's so overly stimulated, they then kind of start to become bored with the sensation of being overly stimulated. So it's like you get the worst of both worlds. What we like is this, and there's a corollary actually with the bounded and play space thing that we've just talked about, which is we want some repetition as a listener. We want to be able to hold on to something. We want to be able to, we like that, but then we also like a bit of nuance, interest, development, change. You know, don't give me a section without adding something new or fresh in. Like, it doesn't need to be massive and like overpowering the whole thing, but just give me a bit of something else. You know, each section just add another little
embellishment,
element, an embellishment, do something different.
Yep.
You know, but that sense of motion and like you say, being on a journey, being taken on through a story, I think is vital. You know, twists, turns, and there are heaps of ways that you can do it. I have a kind of a thing that called TAMTIFTL, right? Which it's a terrible acronym, but I don't know, it sticks with me. But it's a way of kind of analyzing music, like breaking it up into different bits. And so each of these different bits, there are ways of you supporting that development and the motion from the beginning of a song to the end of a song. But just make sure you're doing it right. Whichever of these bits you're going to choose, whichever bits you're altering, fine, make those changes, add those things in as the song progresses. But or pull stuff out as the song progresses. Yeah. Right. I mean, the best example of this for me, like on a personal level, is Hallelujah. Like if you listen to the original Leonard Cohen version, and I know I think Alexandra Burke did a version not too long ago, and there's been loads of versions
she did
of
one
it
around the time of X Factor or whatever. It was.
right. But those versions are like big, and they're throwing stuff in, and the chorus gets huge, right? It's like, especially like on the Leonard Cohen version, it's like, right, what do we got to throw in behind Leonard? Right, he's singing this thing the way he does, right? We need some strings, we need some like big guitars, we need everything to get bigger. But if you listen to the Jeff Buckley version, he does the complete opposite.
Yeah, of
like,
course.
To start with, it's just him and a guitar all the way through, right? With with some reverb and like a little bit of crunch on the guitar, and so there's some kind of effects that you could argue are kind of they're sort of additional elements, but for the most part it's a clean guitar and him. And what he's able to do with just those two elements is just, and in the choruses he pulls away. Like there's less stuff going on, like he sings
smaller, as it were.
Right, he sings smaller, he leaves more space in the guitar part, and then you're really sucked and drawn in. And for me, that's just the version. The Buckley version, sure. Jeff Buckley's version is just like, like, and as a real, so go away and listen to those. Listen to the if you haven't already, listen to the Leonard Cohen version, and then listen to the Jeff Buckley version, and listen out for the difference in the arrangements. And
definitely. Well, this is it, and this goes back to the journey kind of situation as well. For me, on a personal level, I do enjoy songs that do take me on a bit of a journey, to be honest. Like, it's so interesting because you think, in a way, you might think that pop music doesn't have any of that, but it really does. Pop music is always moving. And I remember watching an interview with Darkchild, Rodney Jerkins, the producer, and he said, my way is I just change something every 4 bars. Every 4 bars I change something.
Yeah.
He's like, I'll add a new part, take one away, or I'll change the rhythm in something, or I'll change the melody in something, and it's just like constantly evolving. And we might, like a lot of people, unless you're thinking about like a normal pop kind of like, the big cheesy pop ballad, if you want to call it that, you don't really feel like you're going on a journey, but you're really, most of the time, underneath it all, that like a song that moves a lot, for instance, of recent times is 24K Magic by Bruno Mars. That song is constantly moving. And actually, by the time the 3 minutes is up, you're like, wow, that was quite the journey. But not in the same way as if it was like Hallelujah by Jeff Buckley, because that is moving in a certain way as well.
And you can hear that in like, even like just something that springs like something that's a bona fide pop hit, like Britney Spears' Baby One More Time, which there
you go.
Max
Martin.
It's like these little embellishments that are just there. Like, you don't necessarily know that you notice them. But they do. And then when you get to the big moment, the big chorus at the end, there's the foundations that sort of stay through the track, but then it's layering something else, something else, and it's very subtle, actually.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Charting Tracks. Please feel free to subscribe, like, comment, review, all of that stuff, and follow us on socials where we are at Charting Tracks. We'll try our best to answer any questions you may have, and we look forward to bringing you more of the same next time round. Until then, take care.